There's no way your lover is leaving here tonight. How long has this been going on?
Please, please.
The black lady left her Korean husband, unaware he was the most feared mafia boss in Korea. She signed divorce papers with a man who clipped coupons and apologized to Chess. 3 months later, his face was on every news channel in Korea, not as a victim, but as the king of an empire built on fame, money, and secret sharp enough to cut throats. Amora Thompson had walked away from her marriage thinking she'd escaped her emotionally distant husband. She had no idea she'd just divorced the most dangerous man in Asia. Before we dive into this shocking story of love, secrets, and power, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss these jaw-dropping stories. Trust me, this one will leave you speechless. Let's get into it. The coffee shop in Itaewon smelled like roasted beans and new beginnings, which was exactly what Amora Thompson needed after 2 years of teaching English to teenagers who thought goodbye was pronounced goodbye with aggressive enthusiasm. She'd come to Seoul on a whim, chasing the kind of adventure that looked better on Instagram than it felt in real life. Cramped subway rides, language barriers that turned grocery shopping into interpretive dance, and a loneliness that sat in her chest like wet concrete. She was scrolling through her phone, pretending to be busy so she wouldn't look like the friendless foreigner she absolutely was, when someone knocked over her cup. Not dramatically, not meet-cute style with coffee everywhere and apologies tumbling out like rom-com dialogue. Just a quiet, efficient accident. Her latte tipped. He caught it mid-fall, and when Amora looked up, she saw the human equivalent of beige wallpaper smiling apologetically at her. "I'm so sorry," he said in English that was too perfect, too practiced. "I'll buy you another." Kang Minute J wore glasses that belonged on a librarian, a cardigan that screamed, "I have a savings account and use it responsibly," and an expression of such genuine mortification that Amora couldn't help but smile. He looked like the kind of man who alphabetized his spice rack and felt guilty about it. "It's fine," she said, but he was already heading to the counter, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who did everything like it was a military operation disguised as mundane task. He returned with 2 lattes and the kind of smile that didn't demand anything. Not her number, not her attention, just a smile. Like he was content to exist in her general vicinity and then disappear into whatever beige dimension he'd emerged from. "I'm Minute J," he said, sitting down without invitation but somehow making it feel natural. "You American?" "That obvious?" Amora laughed. "Let me guess. The accent, the height, or the fact that I look perpetually confused by everything." "The confidence," he said simply. "Americans move through the world like they already own it. Koreans move through it like we're trying not to disturb it." It was such an odd, astute observation that Amora found herself leaning in. They talked for 2 hours. He worked in import-export, which sounded boring enough to be true. She taught English, which sounded noble enough to be embarrassing when she admitted half her students were better at grammar than she was. He laughed at her stories, really laughed, not the polite chuckle men did when they were waiting for their turn to talk. When Amora left that day, she had his number and a strange feeling in her gut. Not butterflies. Something quieter, like finding a sturdy chair in a room where she'd been standing too long. Their courtship was a slow burn in a world obsessed with fireworks. Minute J showed up exactly when he said he would. He listened like her words were scripture. He never tried to impress her with expensive dates or grand gestures. Just walks along the Han River, hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and conversations that felt like finally being understood by someone who spoke her emotional language fluently. 6 months in, Amora's best friend from Atlanta video called with suspicion sharp enough to cut glass. "Girl, what's wrong with him? Nobody's that perfect. Does he have a secret family? A gambling addiction? Is he allergic to fun?" "He's just normal," Amora defended, though even she wondered sometimes. Normal men didn't have friends who looked like they'd stepped out of a Korean action movie, all sharp suits and sharper eyes. Normal men didn't get phone calls at 2 a.m. that made their entire energy shift from gentle to something she couldn't quite name. But he always came back to her soft, warm, and present. So she pushed the questions down like pills she didn't want to swallow. They married a year later in a small ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration. His side of the family consisted of exactly 4 people. Stained men in black suits who looked at Amora like she was a bomb they were trying to decide whether to defuse or detonate. Minute J introduced them as business associates, and when she asked why his parents weren't there, his smile went tight around the edges. They passed away when I was young, he said, which explained nothing and everything simultaneously. Her family, meanwhile, filled the room with noise, laughter, and her mother's passive-aggressive comments about marrying foreign that made Amora want to sink through the floor. Minute J took it all with grace that felt practiced, rehearsed, like he'd been trained in the art of deflection. The wedding photos told two stories. In one, Amora glowed with the kind of hope that came from believing she'd found her person. In the other, Minute J looked at her with an expression so raw, so unguarded, that it should have warned her. This man was holding onto her like she was the only real thing in a world made of smoke and mirrors. She didn't notice. She was too busy being happy. The cracks started small, hairline fractures she could ignore if she squinted hard enough. Marriage, Amora discovered, was like buying a beautiful house only to find out it had ghosts. Not the friendly Casper kind, the kind that moved your things, made the floorboards creak at 3 a.m., and left you wondering if you were losing your mind or if reality had simply decided to gaslight you professionally. Minute J disappeared. Not dramatically, not with suitcases and declarations. He just evaporated. Like a magician's trick performed so smoothly you didn't notice the trapdoor until you were standing over it, wondering where your husband had gone. Work emergency became his catchphrase. He'd say it while grabbing his coat, his phone already ringing with a tone that sounded less like a ringtone and more like a warning siren. Amora would watch him leave their apartment at midnight, at 2 a.m., at 4 in the morning, and every time she asked what kind of import-export business required vampire hours, he'd smile that gentle smile and say, "It's complicated." Complicated. The word became a wall between them, brick by brick, until Amora felt like she was married to a man on the other side of soundproof glass. 3 months into the marriage, she started keeping a mental list of oddities. Not because she was paranoid, at least, that's what she told herself, but because the strangeness was starting to pile up like dirty laundry she couldn't ignore. Item 1. The money didn't make sense. Minute J claimed to work in import-export, yet their apartment was modest. His car was a decade old, and he clipped coupons with the dedication of someone who'd survived the Great Depression. But then she'd see him slip a $100 bill to a street vendor without blinking, or watch him casually pick up a dinner tab that cost more than their monthly rent. When she asked about it, he'd shrug. "I save where it matters, spend where it doesn't." Which was either very wise or complete nonsense. Amora couldn't decide which. Item 2. The phone calls. They came at all hours, and Minute J would answer in rapid Korean that her intermediate language skills couldn't fully translate. But she caught words. Dangerous words. Once, she swore she heard him say something about removing someone, and her blood went cold until she convinced herself it was a translation error. Korean was a context-heavy language. Remove probably meant remove from the meeting agenda. Right? Right. Item 3. The men who bowed. Seoul was a city of hierarchy and respect, sure, but the way certain men bowed to Minute J wasn't normal. It was deep, reverent, the kind of bow you gave to someone who held your life in their hands and was deciding whether to squeeze. She mentioned it once over dinner. "Why do people bow to you like you're royalty?" Minute J looked up from his bibimbap, expression so neutral it was practically a painting of neutrality. Respect for elders is important in Korean culture. "You're 32. I look mature for my age." He said it so deadpan that Amora laughed, and the moment passed. But it lodged in her brain like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. Item 4. The closet. Their bedroom closet had a false back. She'd discovered it while searching for winter coats, her hand accidentally pressing against the wood and feeling it give way slightly. Behind it was a space. A hidden space. She didn't open it fully. Some instinct told her that whatever was back there was a door she shouldn't open. But knowing it existed felt like living with a loaded gun in the house and being told not to worry about it. The worst part wasn't the secrets. It was the loneliness they created. Minute J was physically present but emotionally absent, like a hologram she could see but never touch. They'd have dinner together, and he'd be thinking about something else, somewhere else. They'd lie in bed, and she could feel the distance between them measured not in inches but in worlds. Amora tried everything. She learned to cook Korean food, mangling recipes until their kitchen smelled like a crime scene. She studied Korean more seriously, hoping that speaking his language would unlock whatever door he'd closed between them. She planned date nights, surprise picnics, romantic gestures pulled from Pinterest boards that promised to reconnect with your distant spouse. Nothing worked. Minute J would smile, thank her, participate with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling an obligation. And then his phone would ring, and he'd disappear again, leaving her alone with her grandmother's mac and cheese and the growing certainty that she'd married a stranger. Her friends back in Atlanta noticed during video calls. "Girl, you look tired," her best friend Shani said bluntly. Like, soul tired. "Is everything okay?" "It's fine," Amora lied, because admitting the truth felt like failure. She'd moved across the world for this marriage, learned a new language, adapted to a culture that still felt foreign in 1,000 small ways. Admitting it wasn't working felt like admitting she'd wasted 2 years of her life on a beautiful mistake. 6 months in, she started therapy. The therapist, a kind Korean woman named Dr. Park, listened to Amora's litany of complaints with the patience of someone who'd heard it all before. "Have you considered that your husband might be protecting you from something?" Dr. Park asked during their 3rd session. Amora blinked. "Protecting me from what?" "His boring import-export job. Sometimes people keep secrets not because they don't love us, but because they love us too much to burden us with their reality." It was a nice thought. Poetic, even. But it didn't change the fact that Amora was lonely in a marriage that was supposed to cure loneliness. It didn't change the late nights spent wondering if Minute J was having an affair, or the mornings when he'd come home smelling like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne that definitely wasn't his usual drugstore brand. The breaking point was still months away, but Amora could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon. The question wasn't if their marriage would shatter, it was when, and how many pieces it would break into, and whether either of them would survive the explosion. For now, she went through the motions. Smiled when he came home. Pretended not to notice the bruises on his knuckles that he explained away as clumsy moments. Ignored the way certain men on the street would see him and cross to the other side, fear flickering across their faces like shadows. She was married to a ghost, and ghosts, she was learning, were exhausting to love. The 2nd anniversary dinner was supposed to be a reset button. Amora had read enough relationship blogs to know that communication was key, that vulnerability was strength, that love languages and quality time and all those other therapeutic buzzwords could save a marriage if you just tried hard enough. So she'd planned everything with the precision of a military operation disguised as romance. Candles. Check. Her grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, which had survived 3 generations and countless family dramas. Check. A heartfelt speech she practiced in the mirror until it sounded less like a TED Talk and more like something a human woman might actually say to her emotionally unavailable husband. Check. Minute J was supposed to be home at 7. By 8, the candles had burned down an inch. By 9, the mac and cheese had formed a skin that looked like something from a biology experiment. By 10, Amora had moved past worried into that special territory of anger that felt like swallowing hot coals. He walked in at 11:13. She knew because she'd been watching the clock like it owed her money. "Sorry I'm late," Minute J said, his voice carrying that same gentle apologetic tone that usually diffused her anger. Except this time, Amora's eyes locked onto details that made his stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. His lip was split. Fresh blood. The kind that hadn't even started to clot yet. Just a clean red line across his bottom lip like someone had drawn it there with a marker. His shirt, his nice shirt, the one she'd bought him for their 1st anniversary, had a stain on the sleeve that was definitely not soy sauce. Too dark. Too viscous. Blood that wasn't his, based on the fact that his face was too calm, too composed for someone who'd been injured badly enough to bleed like that. Work meeting ran long, he continued, heading straight for the bathroom like this was normal. Like coming home looking like you'd been in a fight club was just another Tuesday. Something in Amora snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, like a bone breaking underwater, silent, final, and impossible to undo. "What kind of import-export meeting?" she said, her voice so calm it scared her. "Ends with you looking like you fought a blender and lost." Minute J paused. His hand was on the bathroom doorknob, and for just a moment, a flicker of a second, Amora saw something in his eyes that made every hair on her body stand up. Not anger, not fear, calculation. Cold, precise calculation. Like he was running probability scenarios in his head, weighing outcomes, measuring risks with the efficiency of a computer that happened to be wearing her husband's face. It was a look of a man who made decisions that changed lives. Permanently. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar gentle expression. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. The words exploded out of Amora before she could stop them. Your job is complicated. Your friends are complicated. The reason you have a false back in our bedroom closet is apparently too complicated to explain. I'm tired of complicated. Minute J. I'm tired of being married to a man who treats me like a security risk instead of a wife. He stood there, steam from the running shower already starting to fog the bathroom mirror, and for a moment she thought he might actually tell her the truth. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I'm sorry, he said finally. Just that. 2 words that meant nothing and everything. Then he stepped into the shower, and the glass door closed between them like a verdict. Amora stood in their apartment, their home, which had never actually felt like a home, surrounded by burnt-down candles and cold mac and cheese and the ruins of a marriage she'd been trying to salvage with Pinterest ideas and therapy sessions. She looked at the bathroom door, heard the water running, and made a decision. She slept in the guest room that night. The mattress was too firm, the blankets smelled like storage, and she lay there in the dark, her mind a tornado of suspicions that had finally organized themselves into something coherent. A fae. Possible. But Minute J didn't have the energy of a cheetah. Cheetahs were distracted, guilty, overly attentive to compensate. Minute J was just absent. Like his body was here, but his mind was running an empire somewhere else. Debt. Maybe. That would explain the money weirdness, the late-night calls, the stress that sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. But debt didn't explain why grown men bowed to him like he was royalty. Debt didn't explain the blood. Secret family. She'd considered it, but no. A man with a secret family would be sneakier, more careful about his lies. Minute J barely bothered to lie. He just said it's complicated, and expected her to accept it. Which left. What? What kind of import-export business required vampire hours, mysterious phone calls, hidden closet compartments, and coming home with other people's blood on your clothes? The answer was there, hovering at the edge of her consciousness like a word she couldn't quite remember. But Amora's brain refused to make the leap. Because making that leap meant admitting that the man she'd married, the cardigan-wearing, coupon-clipping, gentle-smiled man who'd courted her with walks along the river and conversations about philosophy, was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. At 3 a.m., she heard their bedroom door open. Footsteps in the hallway. A pause outside the guest room. She held her breath, waiting to see if he'd knock, if he'd try to apologize, if he'd finally give us something real. The footsteps continued. Another door opened and closed. Then silence. Amora stayed at the ceiling and felt something inside her chest calcify. Not her heart breaking. Hearts broke with pain, with drama, with tears and screaming. This was different. This was her hope turning to stone, one layer at a time, until what remained was just the heavy certainty that this marriage was already over. She just hadn't signed the paperwork yet. In the morning, Minute J was gone before she woke up. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry about last night. I'll do better. MJ. Amora read it 3 times, waiting to feel something. Anything. But all she felt was tired. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She threw the note away, along with the mac and cheese that had somehow become a symbol of everything wrong with her life. Then she went to work, taught English to teenagers who giggled at the word pianist, and came home to an empty apartment that felt more honest in its loneliness than her marriage ever had. 3 weeks later, she called a lawyer. Not because of one big thing, but because of 1,000 small things that had piled up into an insurmountable mountain of evidence that she'd married a stranger who had no intention of ever letting her know him. The lawyer's name was Ms. Jung. She was sharp, efficient, and asked exactly one question. Are you sure? Amora looked at her wedding ring. A simple band that Minute J had chosen because simplicity is honest, and I want to be honest with you. The irony was so sharp it drew blood. Yes, Amora said. I'm sure. Divorce, Amora discovered, was like surgery performed while you were still awake. You felt everything. The cutting, the separating, the removal of something that had been attached to your life. But you weren't allowed to scream. You just had to sit there, sign papers, and pretend this was a rational, adult decision, and not the dismantling of every hope you'd carried across an ocean. The papers took 3 months to finalize. 3 months of living in the same apartment with a man who'd become a polite stranger. They navigated around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography. Careful, distant, achingly civil. Minute Jane never fought the divorce. Never argued. Never pleaded. Never gave her the dramatic confrontation she'd half expected and maybe, secretly, wanted. He just signed when Ms. Jung told him to sign, his face arranged in that neutral expression she'd come to hate. "You deserve happiness," he said one evening, 3 weeks before the divorce was finalized. They were in the kitchen, neutral territory, and his voice was so gentle it made her want to throw something. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you honesty." It was the closest he'd ever come to admitting there were secrets. Amora waited for him to elaborate, to finally crack open the vault of whatever truth he'd been hiding. But he just stood there, looking at her with eyes that held something that might have been regret if regret had learned to weaponize itself. "Who are you?" she asked, not for the first time. "Really?" Minute J's smile was sad in a way that felt practiced. Someone who tried to be someone else. It didn't work. Then he walked away, and Amora was left standing in their kitchen, holding a coffee mug and the shattered pieces of 2 years she'd never get back. He moved out the day the papers were finalized. Packed efficiently, like he'd done this before, like he'd always known this was temporary. He left behind his collection of cardigans, 12 of them, all in various shades of beige and gray, folded neatly in the closet like artifacts from a life he was discarding. And a note. Always a note with him. Never a real conversation. "You deserve happiness. I'm sorry I couldn't give you honesty. MJ." Amora read it once, then put it in the drawer with all the other notes he'd left over 2 years. Breadcrumbs of almost intimacy that led nowhere. She cried for 2 days. Not the dramatic, movie-style crying with mascara running and chocolate ice cream. Just quiet tears that leaked out at random moments. While brushing her teeth, while grading papers, while sitting on the subway surrounded by people who had no idea her life had just imploded. On the 3rd day, she woke up, looked at herself in the mirror, and made a decision. She would rebuild. She would move forward. She would not let this break her. It was a nice thought. Very empowering. Very therapy-approved. Except life had other plans. And those plans involved Minute J haunting her from the shadows like a ghost with excellent credit and mysterious connections. The strangeness started small. Her struggling tutoring business, the one she'd built from scratch, teaching English to business people and students, suddenly landed a contract with a major corporation. Not just any corporation. Samsung. They wanted her to teach executive-level English classes, and the pay was so good she thought it was a scam until the money actually hit her account. "How did you hear about me?" she asked the HR representative during the initial meeting. The woman smiled politely. "You came highly recommended." "By who?" "I'm not at liberty to say." Red flag number 1. Amora ignored it because her bank account was crying tears of joy and she needed to eat. Then her landlord, Mr. Kim, who'd been threatening eviction for 2 months because she'd been late on rent during the divorce chaos, suddenly became flexible. Generous, even. Apologetic. "I'm sorry for the pressure," he said, practically bowing. "Please, take your time. No rush." This was the same man who'd once charged her a late fee because she'd paid at 12:01 a.m. instead of before midnight. Now he was acting like she was royalty who'd temporarily misplaced her crown. Red flag number 2. When her brother called from Atlanta saying he'd gotten into legal trouble, something about a bar fight and assault charges that could ruin his teaching career, Amora prepared for the worst. Instead, a lawyer appeared. High-powered. Expensive. The kind who had a secretary with a secretary. "Mr. Thompson's case has been taken care of," the lawyer said smoothly. "All charges dropped. The other party has agreed not to press forward." "How much do I owe you?" Amora asked, already calculating how many organs she'd need to sell. Already taken care of. "By who?" The lawyer smiled the way people smiled when they'd signed NDAs that could end their careers. "I'm not at liberty to say." Red flag number 3, 4, and 5, all bundled together and waving frantically. Amora wasn't stupid. She'd read enough mystery novels and watched enough K-dramas to recognize a pattern. Someone was helping her. Someone with money, connections, and the ability to make problems disappear like magic tricks performed by a very expensive, very invisible magician. She knew who. The question was why. Late one night, 3 months after the divorce, she sat in her apartment with a glass of wine and her laptop, typing Minute J's name into search engines. Kang Minute J Import-Export Seoul. Nothing useful. Just generic business listings that could have belonged to anyone. She tried variations. Kang Minute J Business Korea. Still nothing. It was like he existed in a bubble of deliberate obscurity, carefully maintained to keep people like her from finding the truth. But here's the thing about truth. It's patient. It waits. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks down the door and sets your life on fire just to make sure you're paying attention. The truth arrived on a Tuesday. Amora would remember that detail forever. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. She was grading papers in a cafe when her phone buzzed with a news alert. She almost ignored it. Almost. But the headline caught her eye the way car crashes caught your eye on the highway. You didn't want to look, but something primal made you turn your head. Korean authorities investigate Kang Minute J, alleged head of Peninsula's largest criminal syndicate. The phone slipped from her hand, clattered on the table. The cafe noise, conversation, espresso machines, K-pop playing softly overhead, all faded to white noise as Amora's vision tunneled to the photo on her screen. Minute J. But not Minute J. Same face, different energy. He stood before cameras in a suit that cost more than their entire wedding, flanked by lawyers who looked like they'd eaten other lawyers for breakfast and were still hungry. No glasses. No gentle smile. His expression was carved from stone, and his eyes, God, his eyes, held the kind of cold authority that made world leaders nervous. This was a man who didn't apologize to furniture. This was a man furniture apologized to. Amora's hand shook as she clicked the article, speed reading through words that rewrote her entire marriage like a Wikipedia page being edited in real time. Alleged involvement in gambling operations. Suspected control over construction contracts. Entertainment industry connections. Political influence. The article was careful, full of allegedly and suspected, because apparently even newspapers were scared of him. They called him the Quiet Storm. Poetic. Terrifying. Accurate. Her mind rifled through memories like someone frantically searching for a file that would make everything make sense. The bowing man. The late-night calls. The blood that wasn't his. The hidden closet compartment she'd been too scared to fully open. The wedding guests who'd looked like they were attending a funeral. Every weird, unexplainable moment of their marriage suddenly clicked into place like a puzzle solving itself. She hadn't married an import-export businessman. She'd married Korea's answer to The Godfather, except The Godfather had the courtesy to look intimidating. Minute J had hidden behind cardigans and coupons and that gentle smile like a wolf in the world's most effective sheep costume. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Amora stared at it, her heart performing gymnastics in her chest. She knew who it was before she answered. Some instinct, the same one that had told her he was safe when they first met. Her instincts, apparently, were terrible and needed to be fired. She answered. Don't believe everything you read. Minute J's voice was exactly as she remembered. Calm, gentle, devastatingly familiar. But don't dismiss it all either. Those were the first words he'd spoken to her in 3 months, and they somehow managed to confirm everything while admitting nothing. Who are you? Amora whispered, aware that people in the cafe were starting to stare at the black woman having what looked like a breakdown over her phone. A pause. Long enough that she could hear him breathing, could imagine him in whatever expensive office or secret compound or villain lair he operated from. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her chest hurt. Someone who loved you enough to try being someone else. It wasn't enough. The line went dead. Amora sat there, surrounded by half-graded papers and cold coffee, and laughed. Not from humor. From the sheer absurdity of it all. She'd divorced her husband because he was emotionally distant and secretive. Turned out he was distant and secretive because he was running Korea's underworld like a CEO managed a Fortune 500 company. The excuse it's complicated suddenly made a lot more sense when it meant criminal empire. Hit subscribe if you don't think lying to your spouse about being a literal crime boss is okay. Only manipulators, deceivers, and people who think secrets are love languages won't subscribe. She grabbed her things and left the cafe, her mind spinning like a top that had been wound too tight. Outside, Seoul hummed with its usual energy. People rushing to appointments, vendors selling street food, the organized chaos of a city that never quite stopped moving. Somewhere in this city was her ex-husband. The man she'd loved. The monster she'd never known. The quiet storm who'd apparently been protecting her all along while she'd been mad at him for working late. The question now wasn't who Minute J was. She knew. The question was what she was going to do about it. And whether the man who'd let her walk away to keep her clean would let her walk back into his world now that she knew the truth. Amora spent the next week doing what any rational person would do after discovering their ex-husband was a crime lord. She spiraled. Spectacularly. With wine and internet rabbit holes and the kind of obsessive research that would have impressed a detective or concerned a therapist. She learned things. Terrible things. Fascinating things. Things that made her want to simultaneously call the police and ask Minute J why he hadn't just told her the truth. Apparently, the Quiet Storm wasn't just a dramatic nickname cooked up by journalists with a flair for poetry. It was what people actually called him in Korea's underworld. A title earned through a combination of strategic brilliance and a reputation for resolving problems so efficiently that they stopped being problems and started being cautionary tales. The deeper she dug, the more insane it became. There were forum posts, quickly deleted but captured by internet archaeologists, discussing his rise to power. A construction empire that controlled half of Seoul's development. Gambling operations that ran so smoothly they were practically legal. Entertainment companies that produced K-pop groups and, allegedly, laundered enough money to fund a small country. Political connections that went so high up they disappeared into the clouds like Jack's beanstalk. And through it all, not a single photograph of Kang Minute J doing anything remotely illegal. He was a ghost. A rumor. A name whispered in rooms where people were too smart to install recording devices. The man she'd been married to. The one who apologized to Chairs and got excited about buy one get one free sales, had apparently orchestrated the entire thing from behind a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. It was like discovering your accountant husband was actually Batman, except Batman had better PR and didn't run illegal gambling operations. Her phone rang constantly. Reporters somehow got her number, asking for interviews, comments, exclusive tells all about life with Korea's most feared mafia boss. Amora blocked them all. What was she supposed to say? Yeah, he was emotionally distant, but I thought it was commitment issues, not commitment to organized crime. My bad. Then came the visits. Not from reporters. From people who made reporters look like friendly puppies. The first was a woman named Ji-woo who showed up at Amora's apartment building wearing a business suit sharp enough to cut glass and an expression that suggested she'd killed people for less than wasting her time. Ms. Thompson, she said in perfect English, I represent certain interests that would prefer you remain quiet about your association with Mr. Kang. Amora, who'd been living off ramen and anxiety for 3 days, laughed in her face. Actually laughed. Lady, I don't know anything. My ex-husband told me he worked in import-export. I believed him because I'm apparently terrible at reading people. What exactly would I even say? Ji-woo's expression didn't change. Nevertheless, silence would be appreciated. Consider it insurance for your continued comfort. It took Amora's wine-soaked brain a full 3 seconds to realize she was being threatened. Politely. Professionally. But definitely threatened. Get out of my building before I call the police, Amora said, her voice steady despite her hands shaking. The police, Ji-woo said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, would be unhelpful in this situation. Have a pleasant evening, Ms. Thompson. She left, and Amora immediately called the one person she knew wouldn't judge her. Shanice, her best friend from Atlanta, who answered on the second ring. Girl, I saw the news, Shanice said before Amora could speak. Your ex-husband is a crime boss, a whole mafia man, and you didn't know. In my defense, Amora said, pacing her apartment like a caged animal, he was very convincing. Also, I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're trusting. There's a difference. Shanice paused. Although in this case, maybe a little bit idiot. How do you not notice your husband is running Korea's underworld? He clipped coupons, Shanice. He got excited about grocery store sales. What kind of crime boss does that? The smart kind, apparently. Another pause. So what are you gonna do? That was the question, wasn't it? Amora looked around her apartment. The one that mysteriously hadn't had any rent issues since the divorce. The one in a building where the security had gotten noticeably tighter. The one that, she was now realizing, was probably under surveillance by people who could make her disappear as easily as Minute J had made that rival gang leader disappear. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know anything anymore. The second visit came from someone unexpected. Minute J's right-hand man, a guy named Taehyun who'd been at their wedding looking like he was attending a funeral. He showed up at her tutoring session, which was wildly inappropriate, and waited until her student left before approaching. Mrs. Kang. Ms. Thompson. Amora corrected sharply. We're divorced. Taehyun bowed slightly. My apologies. Ms. Thompson. I come with a message from Kang Minute J. Amora's heart did something complicated in her chest. I don't want to hear it. He wants you to know you're protected. No one will bother you. The woman who visited yesterday has been spoken to. Spoken to. She won't be bothering you again. The way he said it made Amora's blood run cold. She thought about Jiwoo's sharp suit and sharper threats and wondered what spoken to meant in Minute J's world. Probably nothing good. Possibly nothing survivable. I don't need his protection, Amora said, gathering her teaching materials with shaking hands. I just need everyone to leave me alone. Taehyun's expression was almost pitying. Ms. Thompson, you were married to him for 2 years. In our world, that makes you family. Family is protected. Always. Whether they want it or not. He left before she could argue, disappearing into Seoul's crowded streets like a ghost with excellent tailoring. That night, Amora couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man she'd married and the man he actually was. Were they different people? Or had she just been too naive to see the truth hiding behind the gentle smiles and quiet demeanor? She thought about the wedding photo, the one where Minute J had looked at her with such raw, unguarded love. Had that been real? Or was it just another mask, another layer of the performance he'd been running their entire relationship? Her phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. But she knew who it was before she opened it. I never lied about loving you. Everything else was a lie. But not that. MJ. Amora stayed at the message until her vision blurred. Then she typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. What do you say to the crime boss who broke your heart by trying to protect it? What do you say to the man who'd given up his throne for cardigan sweaters and the dream of being normal, only to have it all fall apart anyway? Finally, she typed, who are you really? The response came immediately. Someone who wishes he'd been brave enough to tell you the truth. Someone who's sorrier than you'll ever know. Another message. You're safe. You'll always be safe. That's all I can give you now. Amora threw her phone across the room. It hit the wall. Cracked, but kept working. Much like her heart, which felt shattered but somehow still beating. She thought about Minute J sitting somewhere in his empire, some penthouse or compound or wherever crime bosses lived when they weren't pretending to be normal, sending a text like a teenager with feelings he couldn't express in person. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastatingly sad. Korea's most feared mafia boss, reduced to late-night texts because he was too much of a coward to face the woman he'd lied to for 2 years. Or maybe not a coward. Maybe just a man who knew that seeing her again would break whatever careful control he'd built around his life. Maybe he was protecting her the only way he knew how. From a distance, through lawyers and mysterious job offers and threats delivered to people who threatened her. It was the most twisted love language Amora had ever encountered, and she hated that part of her understood it. Hated that she could see the logic in his lies. Hated that she still felt something when she thought about him. Even now, even knowing the truth. The next morning, she woke up to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph, their wedding photo, the one where Minute J looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. On the back, in his precise handwriting, some thrones are lonelier than others. Thank you for making me forget mine, even briefly. You were the only real thing I ever had. MJ. Amora held the photo and cried. Not the quiet tears from before. Real, ugly crying that came from somewhere deep in her chest where she'd been storing all the hurt and confusion and anger and, yes, still love. Because that was the worst part. Even knowing everything, even understanding that he'd lied about basically his entire existence, she still loved the man he pretended to be. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand the man he actually was. 3 months after the truth detonated her understanding of reality, Amora made a decision that was either incredibly brave or spectacularly stupid. She was leaning towards stupid, but her therapist, Dr. Park, who'd been earning her fee dealing with Amora's my ex-husband as a crime lord crisis, called it seeking closure. Potato, potato. Except one potato was healthy emotional processing, and the other was potentially getting herself killed. She was going to see him. Not dramatically. Not with a plan for reconciliation or revenge or whatever people did when they discovered their ex was Korea's answer to a mob movie. She just needed to look him in the eye, ask her questions, and maybe, understand how she'd been so catastrophically wrong about someone she'd slept next to for 2 years. Getting to Minute J, however, proved complicated. You couldn't just Google how to contact your crime boss ex-husband without ending up on some kind of watch list. She tried his old number. Disconnected. Tried showing up at the address listed in their divorce papers. Empty office building that looked like it had never been occupied, which was probably the point. Finally, she did something that felt insane even as she was doing it. She called Taehyun. He'd left his card, actual business card, like he was her accountant and not a lieutenant in a criminal organization. The card said Import-Export Consultant, which was apparently code for "will break your kneecaps if boss says so." Ms. Thompson, Taehyun answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting her call. That was either comforting or terrifying. "How can I help you?" "I want to see him," Amora said, skipping pleasantries because what was the point? They both knew why she was calling. Silence. Long enough that Amora wondered if he'd hung up. Then, "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not. I'm doing it anyway." Another pause. "He won't see you. He's been clear about that." Something hot and sharp flared in Amora's chest. Anger. The audacity of Minute J, lying to her for years, upending her entire existence, and then deciding he got to control whether they had a conversation about it. Like he got to make all the decisions. Always. Because he was the powerful one. "Tell him," Amora said, her voice deadly calm, "that if he doesn't meet with me, I'm going to every newspaper in Seoul and doing an exclusive interview about our marriage. Every detail. Every weird moment. Every time he came home with blood on his clothes. I'll make him so visible he'll need sunglasses indoors." "Ms. Thompson, I'm not threatening to expose his business. I'm threatening to expose him. The man. Tell me that won't damage his carefully constructed image." Taehyun sighed, and it sounded like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "I'll relay the message. But Ms. Thompson is not the man you married anymore." "Good," Amora said. "Because I'm not the woman who married him anymore either." She hung up feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if she'd packed a parachute. But God, it felt good. For the first time in months, she felt like she had some control, even if that control was just the ability to force a conversation with a man who controlled half of Korea's underground economy. The call came 6 hours later. Different number. Same voice that had once told her he loved her, gentle and honest and completely fake. The Han River. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. East Side. Near Banpo Bridge. Minute J's voice was flat, emotionless. Nothing like the man who used to get excited about instant noodle flavors. "Come alone." "I wasn't planning on bringing my book club," Amora shot back. A pause. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "It's good to hear your voice." He hung up before she could respond, which was probably for the best because Amora had no idea what to say to that. Her heart was doing complicated gymnastics, and her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, and her sense of self-preservation had apparently taken a vacation to leave her common sense unsupervised. She told Shanice, who was still in Atlanta but had become Amora's lifeline through video calls and messages that ranged from supportive to "Girl, are you insane? You're meeting your crime boss ex-husband alone at night by a river," Shanice said, her face filling Amora's phone screen with an expression of pure disbelief. "That's literally how people end up on true crime podcasts." She was last seen walking toward the water to meet with. "He's not going to kill me," Amora interrupted. "How do you know?" "Because if he wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. He's had 3 months and apparently unlimited resources. I'm still here." Shanice didn't look convinced. "Okay, but what if he tries to, kidnap you back into the marriage? What if this is some weird crime boss love language thing?" "Then I'll say no. I'm not 15. I can handle a conversation with my ex." "Your ex who runs the Korean Mafia." "Allegedly runs the Korean Mafia," Amora corrected, though at this point the allegedly was doing a lot of heavy lifting. The next day crawled by like time had forgotten how to move. Amora taught her classes on autopilot, answering student questions about English grammar while her mind played out 1,000 different scenarios for the evening. Would he show up in a suit? All crime boss energy? Would he bring guards? Would he try to explain himself or just stare at her with those calculating eyes that had once seemed so gentle? By 7 p.m., she was dressed in jeans and a simple black sweater, nothing fancy, because this wasn't a date and she wasn't trying to impress him. This was a reckoning. She took the subway to the river, her heart performing increasingly complicated acrobatics the closer she got. The Han River at night was beautiful in a melancholy way. Lights reflected off the water. Couples walked hand in hand, and Amora felt like she was in a movie where the ending hadn't been written yet. She found the spot near Banpo Bridge and waited, her breath forming small clouds in the cold November air. He arrived exactly at 8. Of course he did. Minute J was many things. A liar, a crime lord, an emotional disaster disguised as a gentle accountant. But he was never late. Except he looked different. No cardigan, no glasses, just a long black coat that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, and an expression that was carved from stone. His hair was styled differently, slicked back instead of the messy, harmless look he used to wear. He looked like power, like danger, like exactly what he was. This was the real Minute J, the quiet storm, and Amora's traitorous heart still skipped a beat. Amora, he said, and just her name in his voice made her want to cry or scream or both. Minute J. She kept her voice steady, professional, like they were business associates and not two people who'd promised forever and delivered approximately 2 years. Thanks for meeting me. You didn't give me much choice. A ghost of a smile. The newspaper threat was creative. I learned from the best. You spent 2 years creatively avoiding the truth. Direct hit. She saw it land in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands. God, she remembered those hands, curled slightly into fists before relaxing. I'm sorry, he said simply. For all of it. Sorry you lied or sorry you got caught. Both. Neither. I'm sorry I couldn't be the man you needed. Amora laughed, sharp and bitter. You couldn't be the man I needed because you were too busy being a crime boss. That's not a personality flaw, Minute J. That's a career choice. It's not a choice when you're born into it. His voice was quiet, and for just a moment, she saw something crack in his armor. My father built this empire. When he died, it fell to me. I didn't want it. But you don't walk away from this world. It walks away from you, usually in a body bag. This was new. Minute J never talked about his family, his past. Amora had assumed it was emotional unavailability. Turned out it was strategic information control. So you decided to play pretend? She asked. Marry some clueless American woman and cosplay as normal. I decided to try. He corrected, and there was heat in his voice now. Real emotion breaking through the careful control. I met you, and for the first time in my life, I wanted something that wasn't about power or control or survival. I wanted peace. I wanted real. So yes, I lied. I lied because telling you the truth meant losing you, and I was selfish enough to want you for as long as I could have you. You lost me anyway, Amora said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. You lost me because you couldn't trust me with the truth. Because you decided what I could handle instead of letting me decide for myself. If I'd told you, Minute J said, stepping closer, and Amora forced herself not to step back, you would have run. Always. You would have stayed out of some misguided sense of love or adventure, and eventually, my world would have destroyed you. I've seen it happen. People I care about becoming targets, collateral damage, casualties of a war they never signed up for. So you made the decision for me. How very controlling of you. Amora felt tears burning behind her eyes and refused to let them fall. You talk about wanting something real, but you gave me a performance. A lie. The man I fell in love with doesn't exist. He exists, Minute J said, and now he was close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. He existed with you. That was the only time I've ever been real, Amora. Everything else is the performance. And there it was. The truth that was somehow worse than all the lies. He hadn't been pretending to be normal. Normal had been his pretending to be himself. Amora's carefully constructed anger wavered. I don't know what to do with that. Nothing, Minute J said. You do nothing. You live your life. You're safe. You're protected. That's all I can give you now. What if I don't want protection? The words came out before Amora could stop them. What if I want the truth? All of it. Minute J looked at her like she'd suggested jumping off the bridge. The truth will ruin you. Maybe I'm already ruined, Amora shot back. Maybe you ruined me when you made me fall in love with a ghost. They stood there, two people who'd touched across impossible worlds, close enough to reach for each other but separated by an ocean of lies and consequences and choices that couldn't be unmade. Finally, Minute J spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I loved you. Love you. That's the only truth that matters. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the soul night like he'd never been there at all. Amora stood by the river, crying like her heart was breaking all over again, and realized something terrible. She still loved him too. Not the cardigan-wearing pretender. Not even the crime boss with a carefully constructed empire. She loved the man caught between those two identities, the one who'd looked at her with unguarded honesty in their wedding photo. The question was whether love was enough when everything else was built on lies. She didn't have an answer, but she had a feeling she wasn't done with Kang Minute J yet. And he definitely wasn't done with her. The thing about closure, Amora discovered, was that it was a myth sold by self-help books and people who'd never been married to a crime lord. You didn't get closure. You got more questions, deeper confusion, and the sneaking suspicion that your heart was a traitor working for the enemy. She went home from the river meeting and did what any rational person would do. She got drunk. Not elegantly drunk. Not wine and cheese drunk. Full-on soju straight from the bottle drunk while sitting on her apartment floor, looking at their wedding photo and wondering if anything in her life had ever been real. Shanice called it midnight soul time, which meant she'd stayed up late in Atlanta specifically to check if Amora was still alive. I'm fine, Amora said, her words only slightly slurred. I'm super fine. I'm the finest fine that ever fined. You're drunk. Observant. That's why you're my best friend. Well, that and you're the only person who hasn't tried to threaten me or protect me from my ex-husband's crime empire. Girl, what happened? Amora told her everything. The meeting. The conversation. Minute J's confession that the only real version of himself had been the one he'd shown her. The way he'd walked away like a protagonist in a tragic K-drama that had been cancelled before the happy ending. So let me get this straight, Shani said when Amora finished. He still loves you. You still love him. But you can't be together because... Why exactly? Because as a crime boss, Shanice. A literal crime boss. I can't just... Amora gestured wildly with a soju bottle, nearly knocking over a lamp. I can't just date my way through the Korean Mafia. That's not how life works. Says who? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Says who? Society. Common sense. The part of Amora's brain that had been raised to make good decisions and marry doctors or lawyers, not men who ran illegal gambling operations. Says reality. Amora finally answered. Says the fact that his world is dangerous and violent and I'd probably end up as collateral damage in some gang war. Shani said slowly. You'd be protected by the most powerful man in Korea who's apparently been protecting you this whole time anyway. Just saying. Amora wanted to argue. Wanted to list all the reasons why this was insane. But she was drunk and tired and her heart was doing that thing where it made decisions without consulting her brain first. I need to sleep, she said instead. Before I do something stupid. Too late for that. You married him in the first place. Amora hung up. But she was smiling despite everything. She fell asleep on the couch, still holding the wedding photo, and dreamed of cardigans and blood and a man who tried to cage a hurricane for her. The next week passed in a blur of normalcy that felt increasingly absurd. She taught English classes, graded papers, went to the gym, pretended her life hadn't become a plot twist in a crime drama. But underneath the routine, something was shifting, a decision crystallizing like ice forming on a window. She'd spent 3 months being angry, being hurt, being the victim of Minute J's lies. But anger was exhausting, and victimhood didn't fit right anymore. What if, and this was a dangerous what if she stopped letting his choices define her story? What if she made her own choice, crazy as it might be? The idea terrified her, but it also felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since the divorce. She called Taehyun. Again, she was starting to have his number memorized, which was either concerning or convenient. Ms. Thompson, he answered, and she could hear the wariness in his voice. Is everything all right? Define all right, Amora said. Actually, don't. I need to see him again. Ms. Thompson. I'm not threatening newspapers this time. I'm asking. Please. Silence. Then, he won't agree. His been difficult since your last meeting. Difficult. That was a polite way of saying what? Exactly. Brooding? Angry? Regretting the whole crying by the river over his ex situation? Then don't ask him, Amora said. Just tell me where he is. I can't do that. Taehyun. She used her teacher voice, the one that made teenagers stop talking and pay attention. I spent 2 years married to a man I didn't know. I deserve the chance to know him now. Really know him. Not the cardigan guy. Not the crime boss everyone's terrified of. Him. Another pause. Longer this time. You know what you're asking for. You come back into his life. You come back into this world. There's no casual dating here. No trial period. You're either in or you're out. And being in means danger. Real danger. I know, Amora said. And she did. She thought about nothing else for days. I'm asking anyway. Taehyun sighed the sigh of a man who knew his boss was going to kill him but was doing this anyway. There's a restaurant. Youngsik. He'll be there tonight at 9. Private room. I'm not telling you this. You're a good friend, Amora said. I'm a dead man if this goes wrong. He corrected, and hung up. Amora spent the rest of the day in a state of controlled panic. She showered, changed outfits 7 times, settled on a dress that was nice but not trying too hard. Black because everything in her closet was either black or black but pretending to be navy. She did her makeup, took it off, did it again, looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was either about to make the best decision of her life or the worst. Youngsik was the kind of restaurant where the menu didn't have prices and the waiters looked like they judged your soul before seating you. Amora gave Minute J's name at the host stand and watched the man's entire demeanor change from polite to deferential so fast it gave her whiplash. Right this way, Ms. Thompson. They knew her name. Of course they did. She was probably on some list. Former wife of terrifying crime boss. Treat with extreme care. The private room was at the back, separated from the main dining area by screens and the kind of privacy that cost more money than Amora made in a month. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears as the host opened the door. Minute J sat at a table set for one, looking at his phone with an expression of concentration that evaporated the moment he saw her. Shock, then something that looked like hope before his face went carefully neutral. Amora. He stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his water glass. What are you doing here? Crashing your dinner, she said, stepping inside before her courage could abandon her. Sorry, should have called first. Except I don't have your number. Because you're incognito or underground or whatever crime bosses call it when they don't want to be found. Minute J stared at her like she was a hallucination his guilty conscience had conjured. You shouldn't be here. Yeah, well, I'm getting really tired of people telling me what I should and shouldn't do. Sit down. We need to talk. To her surprise, he sat today. Maybe because he was too shocked to argue. Maybe because underneath the crime boss exterior, he was still the man who'd loved her enough to try being someone else. Amora sat across from him, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Really looked. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried, the loneliness that came from being powerful and feared and completely isolated. I've been thinking, she stuttered, about everything. About us. About the lies and the truth and all the messy stuff in between. Amora. Let me finish. She took a breath. You lied to me. For 2 years. That was wrong. But I also understand why you did it. You wanted something real in a life built on performance and control. I get that now. Minute J's expression was unreadable. Where is this going? I'm not sure yet, Amora admitted. But here's what I know. I love the man you pretended to be. And I think I could love the man you actually are. If you let me know him. The man I actually am, Minute J said slowly, has made decisions that would horrify you. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on things that would make you run screaming. Maybe, Amora agreed. Or maybe I'm stronger than you give me credit for. Maybe I can handle the truth better than you can handle lying. He looked at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me, Amora said simply. Tell me everything. The real everything. Who you are. What you do. Why you do it. And then let me decide if I can live with it. And if you can't, then at least we'll both know. At least there won't be any more lies between us. Minute J was quiet for a long time. Outside the private room, Amora could hear the muted sounds of the restaurant. Conversation, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Normal people having normal dinners. While she sat across from a crime boss and proposed the most insane second chance in the history of relationships. Finally, he spoke. My father was Kim Taiwan. You wouldn't know the name. He was careful about that. He built an empire from nothing. Gambling, construction, entertainment. By the time I was born, he controlled half of Seoul's underground economy. I was raised to take over. Trained. Groomed. I never had a choice. Amora listened without interrupting. This was it. The truth she'd been asking for. When he died, I was 25. Too young. Too soft, according to his associates. They tested me. Pushed boundaries. Tried to take what was his. What was mine. I had to prove myself. Had to become someone harder, colder, more ruthless than my father ever was. So I did. His voice was flat, emotionless. I did things I'm not proud of. Made decisions that haunt me. But I survived. And the empire survived. And eventually, people stopped testing me. How many people have you killed? The question came out before Amora could stop it. Minute J met her eyes. Directly. 3. Indirectly. I stopped counting after 20. The number should have terrified her. Should have sent her running. But Amora found herself asking, did they deserve it? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Does anyone deserve death? People who hurt children. People who torture. People who... Amora stopped. I'm not asking if you're a saint. I'm asking if you're a monster. I'm somewhere in between, Minute J said quietly. I protect my people. I honor my word. I don't deal in drugs or human trafficking. There are lines even I won't cross. But I'm not a good man, Amora. I can't be. Not in this world. What about with me? She asked. When we were married. Who were you then? His expression softened, just slightly. The man I wished I could be. The man I would have been if I'd been born into a different life. Amora reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. What if I told you that man is still in there? What if I told you I see him, even now? Then I'd say you're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Can't it be both? Minute J laughed. Actually laughed. It was rusty, like he hadn't done it in months. You're insane. You know that. I married you, didn't I? Amora smiled. Clearly, my judgment is questionable. He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was exactly as she remembered. Warm, steady, real. If we do this, he said carefully, if you come back into my life, everything changes. You'll have protection, security, people watching you constantly. Your freedom will be limited. Your safety will always be a concern. And there's always the possibility that someone will try to use you to get to me. Sounds romantic, Amora said dryly. I'm serious. So am I. She squeezed his hand. I'm not saying I'm moving back in tomorrow. I'm not saying I forgive everything. I'm saying I want to try. Really try. With the real you and the real me and no more lies between us. Minute J looked at her like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Amora agreed. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we deserve a second chance. A real one this time. He pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this. Of you. Good, Amora said. Because I'm going to spend the rest of my life holding you accountable. No more secrets. No more lies. We do this honestly or we don't do it at all. Deal. They ordered dinner. Actual dinner. Not just the emotional feast they'd been having. And spent the next 3 hours talking. Really talking. Minute J told her about his empire, his associates, the delicate balance of power he maintained. Amora told him about her tutoring business, her family, the life she'd built after the divorce. They talked about everything they should have talked about during their marriage, all the truths that had been buried under layers of performance and protection. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Amora had to excuse herself to breathe through the reality of what his life entailed. Moments when Minute J looked like he was bracing for her to run. But they kept talking, kept trying. By the time they left the restaurant, it was past midnight. Minute J's security, because of course he had security, waited at a discreet distance. Black SUVs. Serious-looking men who probably had more weapons than the Korean army. This is my life, Minute J said, gesturing to the security. Always. Amora looked at the SUVs, then back at him. Does the cardigan collection come back? Or is that gone forever? He smiled. A real smile. The kind she remembered from their courtship. I think I can manage a cardigan. For you. Then we're good. He kissed her. Right there on the street, in front of his security and passing pedestrians and God and everyone. Kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been holding his breath for 3 months. Amora kissed him back, feeling like she was jumping off another cliff. But this time she knew exactly what she was doing. When they pulled apart, Minute J rested his forehead against hers. I love you. I never stopped. I know, Amora said. I never stopped either. Even when I wanted to. Even when I should have. What happens now? Amora thought about it. About the impossibility of their situation. About the woman she'd been. The one who'd left him because she couldn't handle his secrets. And the woman she was now. The one who'd walked back into his world with her eyes wide open. Now, she said, we figure it out. Together. One honest, complicated, probably occasionally terrifying day at a time. Minute J called for one of the SUVs. Let me take you home. My home while we're talking about a crime boss-lair situation. Wherever you want, he said simply. As long as we're together. Amora got into the SUV, Minute J sliding in beside her. As they drove through Seoul's nighttime streets, she looked at their reflection in the window. A black woman from Atlanta and Korea's most feared crime boss, holding hands like teenagers who'd just discovered love. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly what they both needed. 6 months later, Amora moved into Minute J's penthouse. Not the modest apartment from their first marriage. The real one. The one that screamed crime boss with excellent taste. She kept her tutoring business, insisted on maintaining some independence, and slowly learned to navigate the bizarre world of being in love with a man who ran an empire. It wasn't perfect. They fought about his overprotective tendencies, about her stubborn refusal to have a bodyguard follow her everywhere, about the fact that he still sometimes tried to make decisions for her own safety. But they were honest. Brutally, sometimes painfully honest. And that made all the difference. A year after their reunion, Minute J proposed. Again, this time with full disclosure about who he was, what he did, and what their life together would look like. I can't promise you normal, he said, holding out a ring that probably cost more than a small house. But I can promise you real. I can promise you honest. I can promise you that I will love you with everything I am, including the parts that terrify you. Amora looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. The quiet storm. Korea's most feared mafia boss. The guy who still got excited about instant noodle flavors when he thought no one was looking. Yes, she said. But I'm keeping my own last name this time. I've had enough of being Mrs. Gang. Minute J laughed. Deal. They got married again. Biggest ceremony this time, with her whole family there and his associates looking slightly less like they were attending a funeral. Amora's mother still made passive-aggressive comments. But now they were about marrying into dangerous business instead of marrying foreign, which was progress of a sort. On their wedding night, Minute J gave her a gift. The false back of the closet opened. Inside was exactly what she'd feared and somehow expected. Weapons, documents, evidence of a life built in shadows. But also, every note she'd ever written him. Every photo from their first marriage. A journal where he'd written about her, about them, about trying to be normal and failing and loving her anyway. No more secrets, he said. This is who I am. All of it. Amora looked at the contents of the closet. The darkness and the light. The violence and the love. All mixed together like the most complicated puzzle in the world. Okay, she said simply. I can work with this. And she did. They built a life that was strange and complicated and occasionally terrifying but undeniably real. Amora became known in certain circles as the woman who'd tamed the quiet storm, though she preferred to think of it as the woman who'd refused to let him hide anymore. Minute J slowly, carefully started stepping back from the worst parts of his empire, legitimizing businesses, making different choices, not because Amora demanded it, but because loving her made him want to be the man she saw when she looked at him. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still dangers, still threats, still moments when Amora wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But there were also quiet mornings drinking coffee together, inside jokes about cardigans, and a love that had survived lies and truth and everything in between. 5 years after their second wedding, Amora got pregnant. Minute J cried when she told him. Actual tears. The first time she'd ever seen him cry. He was terrified and overjoyed and immediately assigned 17 security personnel to protect her, which they had to negotiate down to 3. Their daughter was born on a Tuesday. They named her Grace, Because that's what they'd given each other. Grace to be flawed. Grace to grow. Grace to build something real from the ashes of something fake. Korea's underworld whispered about the boss who'd gone soft, who'd let love make him weak. They were wrong. Love hadn't made Minute J weak. It had made him human. And being human, he'd learned, was the bravest thing a man in his position could be. Amora looked at her husband, the crime boss, the cardigan enthusiast, the man who'd lied to protect her and learned the truth to keep her, holding their daughter like she was made of glass and dreams. "We did good," she said. Minute J looked up, eyes shining. "We did impossible." Same thing, really. And it was. They'd taken an impossible situation, a broken marriage, a hidden identity, two worlds that should never have collided, and built something real. Something honest. Something that proved that second chances weren't just for people whose first loves weren't crime bosses hiding behind gentle smiles. Fate, it turned out, wasn't always a sadist. Sometimes, if you fought hard enough and loved honest enough and refused to let the past define your future, fate could be convinced to rewrite the ending. This was theirs. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real, Amora had learned, was worth everything. The end.